evening and welcome to Scale Smart Live. I am your host, Taja M. Graham. I am CEO and founder of Ops IQ, and I am grateful to have you guys here tonight for what will be a very impactful conversation that I hope you take a lot of great information away with. But before we start, many of you have been asking for the past couple of weeks, what is this Ops IQ? Let me share with you a little bit of what we will be doing. It is a digital first platform for those founders and business owners that are looking to scale their business fast, or they're already on that trajectory and they need help with some stability to make sure they continue to grow, right? So it comes in three ways. It's going to come, one, in a very exhaustive library of resources for you. SOP, templates, other documents that you can use, rip and use them right away. The other is a real-time dashboard that's going to give you exactly how your growth is projecting as you move forward, so you can see it in real time. And then last is I have a curated group of C-suite advisors. They have been in the seats of multiple different company dynamics, startups to major corporations, and they're going to work alongside of you as advisors to help you in your business. And tonight, I have the pleasure of having some of those types of advisors, and they have been instrumental in working behind the scenes with me in vetting all of those documents that you will find in the library, making sure that it is useful to you. So I am so excited to welcome Amber, Audrain, and Sonja Peters from Audrain Advising to the table tonight. Welcome, ladies. So glad to have you both.
Thank you, Taja. Thanks for having us. We're so excited to be here.
Absolutely. So a little bit about these two phenomenal executives. One is Amber had a passion for helping small to mid-sized businesses grow in a space of where it is, where the heartbeat of your business is, which is in operations, right? So how to make certain that you can grow, and then also helping you when you are ready for contract work or to build out a proposal, how to do it in order to win that award of a proposal or a contract. And then alongside, so she is obviously the founder of Audrain Advising, but right next to her is Sonja Peters, who is one of the managing directors, who is instrumental in making sure that all of the processes and the systems and how you want them to connect make sense for your business and where you are. So tonight's conversation is rich because this is my wheelhouse. It's my love language. So I'm so excited to have both of you here tonight. So share a little bit more, Amber, about why did you make this decision
Oh my gosh.
and what it means to you and Sonja as you guys move forward.
Yeah, so Sonia and I've had the pleasure of working with her for about a decade now, which is just really lovely. She's so smart and so much fun to work with, as you well know, Taja, and just multi-talented. We started working together about a decade ago in helping founders launch small ventures, right? And one of the things we saw again and again, Sonia and I are about both like back end people, right? We're in the back, we're crunching the numbers, we're making things work. And one of the things that we saw again and again were these founders and these business leaders with brilliant visions, right? Passionate about impact. They know exactly what they want to get done in the world. Incredible products and services, but maybe struggling on some of those foundational systems and processes that enabled them to live that vision out, right? To really have that come to fruition. And Sonia and I have just from different angles gotten to have the real privilege of wrapping around small business leaders and organizational founders to really make sure that that vision comes to fruition because they are resting on that bedrock that we get the privilege of building around them.
That is wonderful. Wonderful. Sonja, please share what brought you to this journey and this place
Absolutely.
of coming alongside with Amber and the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having us. I did the old I'm still on mute earlier, so really appreciate you having us on the live today. So I've spent about the last 10 plus years working with entrepreneurs, and I've had the pleasure to work across nonprofits, education, venture capital, tech startups, really small, medium-sized businesses, hospitality, And I've seen this really common kind of through line of really, like Amber said, really talented folks with really great ideas. But there's usually that kind of a sticking point where they've been doing the same things, working just as hard. They've had great momentum, but they've sort of reached this plateau where their business isn't quite growing at the trajectory that it has been. And we've seen this across all sectors, and typically can pinpoint it to some of those really critical operation systems. So that's why I feel really passionate about working with Amber, and I'm really excited to have joined her team recently to really work with a lot of folks here locally and nationwide to kind of get over those humps to help them scale and reach their full potential. And I know Amber and I feel particularly strong about working with really mission-driven organizations across all the different sectors, but that's kind of our sweet spot is working with those small, medium-sized businesses, regardless of sector, to really help them reach their full potential by building those back-end systems that are typically, not the most exciting. They're not the ones that are, really program-oriented, but they are those things that are going to really help organizations scale and help them increase their impact by having those systems in place.
Yeah, well, I love that. I love the fact and we're all on the same page as to how to uplift what are those small, mid-sized businesses, those founders, those solopreneurs, to really be able to scale. I was just reading, and I oftentimes quote the fact that, most businesses, unfortunately, fall apart within the first 5 years of existence. And I recently read a report that Cantor was stating that, even entrepreneurs, it's probably like a 3-year threshold before they're just exhausted, and decide to seek other ways of support. And it's unfortunate, but I'm hoping that having systems and processes and expertise like what is Audrain Advising, what is OpsIQ, will help to change that trajectory as it moves forward, because there's such a need. So tonight's topic, or the actual main topic, is scale with operations by building systems for sustainable growth. That's exactly what we're talking about, right? So I love this topic, and I want to start with our very first topic, which is operations for scale. Talk to me about what that means to you guys and what you see in the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on it perfectly, where we talk a lot about founder burnout. Typically, it's because the operational systems aren't there and the founder is doing everything. And that works at first, and it works to kind of get that momentum and to get the initial kind of success. But when we talk about scale, we really talk a lot about having systems that don't depend on any one or two people. And so that's why it's really important for scaling, because who knows what could happen. Somebody could just not show up one day. Somebody could win the lottery and they could just disappear. And we don't want everything to fall apart because that one person's not there. So we talk a lot about scalability, sustainability, regardless of kind of these external factors that most of the time we don't have control over. So what we really sort of preach over and over again is really building those foundational systems that can function and that can help you grow regardless of market conditions or who's in those key spots, who happens to show up that day or doesn't show up that day. So when we talk about operations, it is a little bit broad, but it's really specific to each company that we work with. Is what are those key levers? What are those key functions that have to continue regardless of who shows up or who's there or who's in the position of power? And making those decisions. So we feel really passionate about this, as you can tell, because it is such a high impact lever that I think a lot of folks sometimes overlook, because sometimes they think, oh, we're not finding product market fit, or, well, we had this great momentum at first, but people just aren't excited about this. And typically we can go through and find those few things that are kind of on the verge of falling apart as the company is looking to scale. And so that's where ideally we'd come in before then, but a lot of times that's where we get brought in, is to really troubleshoot and to find those areas of tension that are just about to break and that are really holding that scale and that growth back. Yeah. Amber, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's perfect. I think the only thing I would add there, and it's really just building on what you said, Sonia, I think we talk about systems that can be handed to anyone and enacted, right? Partly because we know that founders and small business leaders, they have an area that they are experts in, right? Where their brilliance really shines. And trying to build a business through heroics and 3 a.m. every day, and you're going to burn out fast, but you're also really doing a disservice to your business and to your clients and to your community when you're going at that range, rather than leveraging the expertise of your community and those around you who can dig in. And so one of the things we see, Sonia mentioned that growth plateau earlier, is a lot of times folks are hitting that, they're doing the same things, putting in that same level of effort, and they're not getting as far because of that founder. And sometimes we have to really get that knowledge out of their heads and systematize it in a way that it goes beyond heroics to really be something that is sustainable.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I kind of look at it very similar to anyone who is into professional sports, or even just
Yeah.
the weekend warrior, or workout enthusiast, right? It takes discipline to operate a business in scale. And the discipline comes within operations, having sustainable systems in order to grow the business, right? So I look at myself, I'm out here, I try to make sure I have a regimen of a workout, right? And I have to have a plan. That is what the system allows for me to do, is have a plan, have an actual disciplined way of how I'm going to go about my workout on a routine, right? And even if I say, for instance, I wasn't the person, right? And I needed to give it off to someone else, now they have that plan. They know the right way of going about growing and scaling the business in areas. The other thing, and I would love for you guys to chime in, is oftentimes people think, okay, now I've got this playbook and this is it, and I don't go back to revisit it, right? But the reality of it is all of your processes and systems, SOPs, whatever that documentation is, should be reviewed on a routine basis to make sure it still aligns with how your business is performing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, if it takes, I would say, more than a month to realize that something that you've used as an SOP is outdated, you're probably not using it in a way that it should be used. It should be really a living, breathing document and a collection of resources that folks use. And so many times it's only, sort of written once. Sometimes we use it for training, but typically what we see is when a new person is being onboarded, they'll go through those documents and say, well, it says this, but that's not, let me show you how
But
we actually do it, right?
actually,
And so it's very much becomes that unofficial way of doing things. And folks don't really take the time to, step back and revisit those policies and update them in a way that it would be really helpful. And if you think about, if absolutely no one in your company showed up tomorrow, could you replace every single person there? And would they at least have a starting point? Like, would they
right?
know what to do at any certain time or with a certain project? And if that is like gives you a heart attack, that's probably a good sign that it's time to update those SOPs.
I think that that's a really good point, Sonia. And I think small businesses are used to thinking about governance around data, for example, or technology, and how do we evaluate whether or not those processes are still working well for us, and if we're looking at the right things, measuring the right things. But the operations side of the house tends to get largely ignored when it comes to those governance systems, and that becomes really important when we're talking about SOPs that allow the leader to get out of being deep in the weeds of the business and work on the business. And so that part just becomes really, really important. But it's also a quality measure, right? And that's one of the things that I think gets missed a lot is this isn't just about, and it's really funny with startups in particular, right? Because they want to be nimble and flexible
Oh
and
yeah.
totally, right? Be innovative. Please innovate your little hearts out. And you still need some level of systems, right? Those systems can be flexible with you and iterate with you, but there's still a quality bar element here. And when the founder or that small leader is the one who's always setting that QA bar, you get into this place where every client has a different experience, right? Every time your product is leveraged, there's a different consumer experience. And you can't manage that QA well enough unless you are deep in the weeds. And these operational processes, systems, onboarding systems, SOPs, etc., solve for a lot of that, or at least make it easier to have oversight over those processes.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much connectivity, to your point. I know we often hear this analogy of, for good businesses to thrive, you got to focus in on the people, the process, and the systems. And they all are really interconnected in the fact that if the people don't know how to run the business, right, they get frustrated. Then you got a lot of turnover, right? Because they can't perform at their best, right? Or they don't feel confident in what they're doing. You got to have the right processes in place. You got to give them, this is how we go about this. This is how we open the store, right? And then they got to have the right systems in order to be able to be productive, right? So if we don't have the right systems in place, or we have too many systems in place, which is oftentimes the case, right?
Yes.
We're not using them the right way, right?
Using 10 systems, but only a quarter of the way to their full implement possibilities. And now we're onboarding folks to 15 systems. And yes, it's I would say we see that, Taja, a lot of folks have so many tools in their toolbox that are being under leveraged, not leveraged, but you're paying for them and they could absolutely make your life easier. This is something I think Sonja in particular gets really excited about, because these are tools, right? Like these are really easy tools to leverage. So yeah, I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, they're tools in your leadership toolbox, but I think a lot of times get confused for this is my leadership style, right? So the folks who have the 15 different systems, they tend to be the really rigid, I want things done this way, so I'm going to create a step-by-step for every single thing, even if it's contradictory, because I want it to be a system in place. And folks like that think, well, I'm going to make sure that this is done up to my standard of quality. So that's like what's going on in their heads. On the other end of that spectrum, you have folks who come in and say, I want my team to have autonomy. I want them to do what they do best, to come in. They know what the end result should be. How they get there is up to them. And I'm not going to be too prescriptive. And for a lot of those, they're very much, they can work up to a certain point, but both of those get really challenged when it's time to scale and at certain growth points, particularly when you're talking about sort of those really large multipliers, right? Whether you're raising capital or you're looking to really, go public or really expand to a different, to serving a different demographic, a different group of customers. So that's usually where we see those things come at odds, and people confuse it for this is my leadership theory and this is my leadership style. And that's how it shows up, is in those systems. And there is a way to give people autonomy, but have resources for them to know where to go if they have questions. There is a way to document exactly how you want things done, and for your team to be able to say, I kind of think this could be done better this way. Can we revisit this? Having those mechanisms to talk about the systems, so they're not just follow steps A, B, C, D, E, and F, right? If your work is in an assembly line, yes, that works. For most of today's jobs, that kind of over prescriptiveness with 15 different systems is only going to hold you back. And so it really is about finding that middle ground between those two leadership styles, work environments, and really helping to make sure that your folks, yes, they can have the autonomy to make decisions and to do work the way that they, that you've hired them to do, while still having those guardrails in place and making sure that they have the supports when needed and they know where to go to find information, that it's not all just go to this one person to find this information, right? They have to be able to have some resources at their disposal, and that's all systems are. And these systems and processes are just resources for your team, and they shouldn't make it more complicated.
I love that, Sonia. And I think, to bring it down a little bit into practice, like one example is with SOPs, right? So a good SOP doesn't just tell you what to do, it tells you why. It goes into the approach. Like for our team, we're talking about this is the Audrain Advising way. Now, this is a living, breathing document. So you absolutely should bring forward, let's leverage this technique, this approach, this process to improve this and iterate and get feedback and move forward. But I think it goes back to really balancing what are we doing and grounding ourselves in why. And I think that this is cross sector, right? Grounding yourself in the why for that approach is really important for teams to understand the role that they play and the role that they play in complicated systems that are growing fast and there are a million fires, and why their piece in that puzzle really matters.
Yeah. And this brings us to our next topic, which is SOPs for growth. But
Yeah.
I was just with a client last week, and they were, struggling with one of the SOPs that we were making sure that they adopted. And I said, hey, guys, calm down. An SOP is a standard. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a standard. Yeah. It does not mean that this is where we have to go. This is just saying, here's what, based on industry standards or based on what your way of growth is, this is the standard. Now you have to make sure you customize that, right? Which is what I believe you're getting to, Amber, to the nuances of your business, right? And I love it when you engage, especially if you have team members already on board, that you engage them in the process, because they're the ones ultimately that are responsible to it. So a little bit of buy-in from those that are doing the work when updating those standards of operating procedures makes a lot of sense. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and I think that's one of our favorite ways to develop SOPs is, okay, so if I think I know how to do this exactly the way correctly, and I want you to do it, is I will do it for you, or the person, who's the founder, I will do it for you. You write down and tell me what you see. How are you interpreting what I'm doing? Because I think you'll see a lot of discrepancies as a lot of things are going on in my head. And so I know why I'm doing a certain thing or how this goes from A to B.
It's built on, right?
But yeah, so really that perception is just as equally as important as what's on the paper, because your team, maybe some of the language that you're using isn't standard across your team, or maybe some, the way that it's organized isn't as helpful. So that's one of my favorite things to do, especially when there's clearly some kind of misalignment there about what the expectation is and versus what the end result is just watch me do it and you tell me what you see and how are you interpreting what I'm doing here. And then let's talk about it and let's figure out where we can make this more clear, how we can organize this in a way that's more helpful versus just, well, I gave you my expectation, but you're not doing it. So it's written down, right? It's written down right there. You should be able to do it exactly like I do. And a lot of times there's just some gray areas there that get lost.
There's typically gaps, but I think that there's a change management element in here that gets missed a lot when we're thinking about SOPs. Anytime we're talking about implementation and adoption, we're talking about people. And I think, Sonja, what you're talking about matters so much because you're making sure folks are bought into not just what's written down, but why are we seeing it this way? Does it make sense? Does it make sense for my context? What pain points? What are we solving for? Whether for our team, for the client, like what are we solving for here? And I get really excited about SOPs from a growth lens, also as a process improvement mechanism, right? Because this is also a way, and Sonja, I think what you're describing works so well when the process is is close to an exemplar, right? We know the right way for our context right now. There's also a lot of teams that as they're growing, they're like, listen, friends, we're going to have to abandon this old way. We need a new process. We're all feeling the pain of it. Let's get into the weeds and talk about that. And one of the things that I get really nerdy about is I love going through that process with a team of like, all right, let's get everyone in a room. Walk me through what this business process looks like. We're going to write down every little bit. It's going to be on a whiteboard. You're going to tell me who does what, when is this decision made, how is that lever pulled? And then we're going to look at this and go, okay, so tell me what's not working here. You redesign this thing, right, in a way that makes sense, is sustainable, can grow, can leverage maybe fewer human resources, fewer tech systems, right? Really fully adopting a way and a approach. And then you build an SOP on that exemplar. These folks in the room are already built in. They've already been part of the solution of redesigning what should be true in this business process, right? And so I think part of when we think about SOPs, folks can think about them as almost a compliance element when really they're a change management element. This is about getting folks bought into a way of doing things and why that way matters.
Right. Yeah. And when you look at it in that way, right, like you can see quickly the efficiencies that present themselves, because sometimes we get stuck in a process that, like to your point, it worked 5 years ago. It worked 3 years ago.
In a different context.
Maybe new technology or, someone that comes on staff that's performing a certain part of it. Now we have to reflect on that and see where the efficiencies lie in that redraft, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, and
I think
if you're drafting something you want folks to use every day, they have to be a part of that. I'm sorry, Sonja.
Yeah. Oh, no, you're fine. No, I think this is especially important when the team substantially grows, because a lot of times, especially with the founding team, a lot of their SOPs, their way of doing things is just based on the company culture at the time. And naturally, as your company shifts from 5 to 25 employees, the company culture has to shift with that. And so the way that it has been operating with just 5 folks, you have to build systems for those additional 20 people to be able to know how to function in this world that you've built. And I think a lot of times founders kind of take that for granted of, well, everyone, even if you worked in 2 almost identical tech startups, they're going to function entirely differently. And so using SOPs as just a way to kind of bring people together and not thinking of it as it's something that sits on the shelf. It's how to tell me if you're doing this right or wrong. It's more of, here's how you can succeed here. And if something's not here and you're not sure how to succeed in this specific thing, then let's have that conversation and let's figure out what the appropriate level of systems or SOPs to build around this. And so I think, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, particularly with new staff. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Jonathan Gravis, I saw your comment. Thank you. Gravis marketing team there. Phenomenal work they do. If you have questions, please put them in the comments. We'll be sure to address them as we go throughout the rest of the call here tonight. So yes, please share your comments and questions. We appreciate them. Let's go on to the next topic. Building for sustainable growth. Wow. What's
just a small
sauce here, guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's a big topic, but if you can build, and I would take this one step further, is build for an exit. If you can build for an exit, you can build for sustainable growth. So if you walk into, even if you plan to stay at your business and your company that you're the founder of for the rest of your career, if you build it and backwards map it for an exit, whether that's succession or selling or an acquisition, going public, whatever that looks like for your specific business, if you backwards map from that exit, you will find that growth is going to be built in there. Because if you think about an exit, and I want to exit this and get $2 million for my business, I can backwards map that for here's the growth I need, here's the sales I need, and then what systems do I need to get to that point, and at all these different scales. And so you don't have to build everything from scratch right at the beginning, but always have that exit in mind, because that's going to help you get to the growth that you want, even if you don't ever plan to exit.
My
And so
heart
I think
flutters hearing you say that. I just had this conversation Friday with the founder that and I told him, I said, look, if you don't have intentions to exit, that's understandable. But whomever you're going to give this legacy to, right, needs to know what the book is, what the playbook is, right? They need to know what the business plan is, what it looked like, as well as the supporting documentation of SOPs and other documents, so that they can clearly see the engine, right? Like, it's when you go buy a new car, you got to have the driver's manual to understand where to find the spark plugs, right?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
what this is all about. And then how to operate those spark plugs. So I'm excited.
These are the same tools, though, that allow you to not have all the decision making on one person's plate, right? If you're preparing for the systems for exit, then you're also preparing to be able to take a week-long vacation and things not burn down, right? So, like, these systems are multi-purpose, but it means that it can live without you. And I think some founders, some small business leaders, that's scary, right? I built this. This is mine. This is my baby. But you can't grow that way. That's not a path to actually having something that can thrive outside of just your own brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even more important, if you are intending to exit, guess what? That new buyer is going to want to know that there is sustainable systems, processes in place, that all they have to do is step in and demonstrate support as a leader to the team. That's what they're wanting to buy, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
And they're wanting to buy a business that they can grow, right? And so
right.
if you haven't built the systems that can grow, what they're part of their due diligence is looking into, can I step into this and get the same results that you have, but then grow it by this multiple, right? That's the only reason people are going to buy your business. And if you haven't built the systems to run it as is, without having to start from scratch and recreate all of these things, then your valuation is going to be drastically lower than somebody who has already thought about that and who's already ready and saying, you can step into this. Here's exactly how many hours a week you're going to need to do this. And to oversee these things, here's who does what. Here's how to know who does what, right? When you walk in and you're like, I don't know who's in charge of this. Here's how to find out. Those kinds of businesses are valued at so much more than we do it like this. And my cousin's brother does this piece. And then if you have a question on this, well, I just go to this person because they just know everything. They've been here for 20 years. And that's, for buyers, the biggest red flag. And so if you can think like somebody, and let's think like a founder who's eventually going to exit, you're going to come across those things quite a bit. And it's surprising how much you'll notice it once you're looking for it, of what are those things that make me indispensable. And it's great to feel important and indispensable and like you're really critical to the company, but it's also devaluing your company. And so just being mindful of that, of even if you never want to exit, these are the best practices that are going to help you grow, even if you want to stay there.
I do think Jonathan's question about what are those core SOPs I need actually speak to this part about sustainable growth, right? Because I think when a lot of folks think about SOPs, part of the question becomes, I don't really know where to start. And so when we're thinking about growth, it's those processes that are done over and over and over again, right? Like maybe there's this thing that my business needs to do twice a week, then we need to codify the right way of doing that process. And so that might be customer onboarding, right? So when we successfully make a sale, what happens then? And what is that timeline to that MVP with that customer, right? Like, what are those benchmarks? What is done with that new customer? And a mistake I see a lot of startups make, they might have really strong systems around sales, but once you actually have to start making good on those commitments to that new client or customer, they have weak systems for how that's delivered. And so that can be a really strong place to start, because it's highly replicable. It's a great way to manage quality, and it's a great way to make sure that that growth is feasible.
Yeah. And we think about SOPs and the, kind of where to start. Typically, there's some standards across the board. So your HR systems, your people management systems, those should all be codified. Your product systems, kind of like what Amber was talking about. So how does, if it's a tech product, what's the tech stack that's used? How do these things work together? There's the vendor relationships, if you have outside vendors, which almost everybody does. Your customer, your kind of go-to-market processes, those should all be codified. And then there's some specific ones in different industries that I think it's really helpful to also, again, go back to that, maybe not exit conversation, but at this large scale, what are the systems that we're going to need in place? So if you're a tech startup, even at the very beginning, I would start looking into what are the requirements for your ISO SOC 2 certifications. Because if you want those large clients, you want that big money, those are things you're going to have to comply with. So why not do it from the beginning? You don't have to be as regimented as you are later, but a lot of times, those compliance pieces are really important, and those compliance pieces can hold people up from getting the contracts. So, HR, go to market, but then don't forget compliance of, even if I don't need this HIPAA certification right now, when I'm fully launched and when I'm going after these big clients, am I going to have to do it? In many cases, probably. And so thinking about those pieces, those are great ways to start building your SOPs, because your SOPs are going to dictate your employees' natural compliance towards these gold standards anyways. So in a lot of those cases, it is really helpful to look through, if my ideal client requires me to be ISO certified, what are the things that my team is not going to pass? Like, what are the things that could cause us this massive deal because we haven't built these systems and we don't have the best data privacy practices? We don't have data retention policies. Like, what are some of these things that could be red flags that we can easily build into our SOPs now, just knowing that when this time comes and this massive growth is on the horizon, then we can go towards that without having these things holding us back. So it is slightly different for depending on kind of what industry you're in and what company size you're in. But for the most parts, I would say those buckets are the biggest ones that
I feel like that's
I would encourage
so much of that's about risk management too, right? Like, what are the things that are going to catch on fire if I look the other way for a minute? And we're thinking about compliance, we're thinking about security, we're thinking about ongoing systems that bring in revenue, and understanding those big risk areas are great places to start.
Yeah. And I would encourage, especially if you have clientele already working with you, engage them to get some feedback. That's going to be helpful in you being able to craft what is, especially in the way of sales or onboarding of those clients, right? Because they'll know right away, hey, this is the bottleneck because I haven't heard back from your team and I know you need this from me, right?
Yes.
They know right away. Or you told me the process would be this long and it's really not. So you might then be able to say, okay, let's go through and see what's happening here that's, bottlenecking the time. Could be that you have no process in place for that, but your customers will be very honest with you. And that's the way I would.
And what we hear a lot, Taja, is like, hey, I heard from you every day when you wanted me to buy. Now I've bought and I can't get anyone on the line to get this moving. And
those transition pieces are usually the ones that fall through. And a lot of times what we see is the transition is done by two folks who work really well together. One of those people leaves and then things just fall apart, right? Because it was their working relationship, their interactions that made things run smoothly. And then one person will leave or both will leave. And then it's all of a sudden, well, this used to not be an issue. This customer handoff from sales to onboarding or whatever department they're going to. So a lot of times it is those kind of transition pieces that we look for as well of, well, how do you go from A to B? And how does somebody, like there's literally times where people like take a piece of paper off a cork board, put it onto another piece of on another cork board, and like, this is our process. Like, okay. I mean, it is, we can improve it, but let's write it down for, at least for right now. Yeah. Cork board A to B.
Yeah. Great question, Jonathan. Please, again, if you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you tonight. Let's get to, because we're cutting the time here almost. Let's talk about our last topic for tonight, which is building for sustainable growth. That's another favorite here.
I think, do we have one more after this?
I think that was the second one, Taja, I think.
Oh, is this the second? Okay. All right. What is I think we've covered this topic. So operations for scale, SOPs for growth, and then building for sustainable growth. Okay.
All right. I guess we got there.
What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think building for sustainable growth just wraps up everything that we've been talking about. Everybody wants growth and is, there is that kind of trajectory at the beginning where growth is somewhat easy, not easy, but easier.
People are buying, they're interested.
Yeah, absolutely. The SOPs and the systems that you put into place are going to create that sustainability. And right now, a lot of the work that we're doing is also sustainability when, you don't have all of the information. Maybe you don't have all of your funding committed for the next, 48 months. So what does this look like in different scenarios? So sometimes sustainability can be, planning for sustainability can be building options A, B, and C. And we'll do our best to go with A, but we have a backup that we can easily pull out of the drawer if we need to go to B. And so, a lot of times building these processes does take some what ifs. And somebody, I think it's really helpful a lot of times to have somebody external come in and kind of look at the way things are run, how things are done, why are things done the way they are, and to kind of question those, not because it's wrong, but just because it's, part of our job to figure out those kind of different scenario planning options and how do we make sure that sustainability means sustainability in various landscapes and situations.
I think that's really well said, Sonja, and something I think we come up against a lot when folks are really mindful of the growth that they want to make, but less mindful of the systems that will break when they get there. And so we've seen this all the time, right? Like we do fractional operations and fractional procurement, right? So we see these pieces, these tensions where folks are like, okay, great, we've changed our portfolio and now 85% of our business is with government contracts, but we now need to staff up significantly. We now need to, all these elements. And no one was planning for what if that growth actualizes. And now they're there and they have to make good on commitments. And that's when we start to see things really start to break.
Yeah. I oftentimes caution, especially those that are experiencing that trajectory of growth, very, very short period of time. And a lot of times we lose the discipline of, now I got to go and hire 20 people to fulfill the work versus looking at, okay, is there an automation? Is there the ability to realign roles and responsibilities first before we make that commitment, right? And it brings that imbalance then to your balance sheet, when you're trying to say, wait a minute, I do want this major contract that's going to, on the top line, give me this type of revenue, but then in hiring or making expenses, that we don't really think through, okay, let's really look at the process and how much more consumption in the process will require then that extra body or that extra new system to be in place in order for us to facilitate it. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I try to
Absolutely. So
always
often,
caution them.
absolutely. I mean, so often just simply staffing up isn't going to solve the problem
Mhm.
because you don't have those exemplars in place, even with your existing staff, right? Like if you can't get to an MVP with a tech product in 60 days for a new client, staffing up isn't going to solve your problem. You need to operationalize and codify here first, right? And I love that you say that, Taja, because I think that there's something really powerful about like, all right, how do we get real smart with the resources we have today and then start adding on to a machine that's working?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And especially with new lines of business, if that's where the growth is, of doing something in a different way than you've traditionally done. Like, for example, if you're moving to government contracts, there's a lot more compliance and a lot of different hoops to jump through. So those are all new systems. So that's the perfect time to be building your SOPs, right? Right as when you're learning these new things, because traditionally at the very beginning, you're going to be doing them exactly by the book, right? And so
Oh,
you need to build your own internal playbook at that time to make sure that your staff is always up to date with all of those requirements as well. So that's the perfect time to be building those systems.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a lot about the operations side of the house, which I know is a big part of what Audrain Advising is about. But we've also talked a little bit about government contracting. And I know that that's a space that you guys are in. So I'm going to give a double bonus tonight to our audience because I would love to open up what is our last couple of minutes here just for you guys to share what it is you do in that space for those that might be really wanting to, see their opportunities in procurement.
Yeah, I get really excited about this, Taja, because when we're talking about mechanisms for growth, this is a huge one. And what we tend to see, so we do fractional operations support, which folks kind of get cross-eyed about. They're used to fractional marketing, fractional CFOs, et cetera. Operations is kind of unique. And then we do fractional procurement support. So think about those small teams that are maybe super product or service focused. They haven't brought a big operations team in-house yet. They haven't brought a procurement team in-house yet. We're able to completely embed and provide that strategic expertise and do that work with and for them. And so on the procurement side, that's really exciting because this is such a huge lever for folks to start getting critical relationships with government agencies, with corporate buyers, and start building that book of business in a really unique way. And I think what folks get tripped up by is how do we find the right opportunities? How do we position ourselves? And how do we get past RFPs that are highly technical and highly compliance driven, right? And so the fact is, like, proposal development is its own discipline. And I think that that's easy to forget. And so one of the things that we get really excited about with folks is how do we best, we will coach and mentor folks to get them to a place where they are well positioned, but then we'll actually also help them in developing those proposals and finding those well fit opportunities as well. And that's a huge lever when we're thinking about growth. Just a huge opportunity depending on how you're positioned and what your team does best.
Yeah. How do you set those expectations when, here comes this, very much so ambitious founder, CEO who is like, nope, I heard Dawn Nicole McElwain say last week that there's $7 trillion business out there and I should go after it, right? You guys know Dr. Dawn Nicole, right? So
absolutely. And she's absolutely right. Like there is so much work out there. What I caution folks, and this sounds like such a downer, but a business leader told me this once, and it kind of sits in my brain a lot. You can drown in opportunity, right? If you don't have those right systems and processes in place, those strong operations, you can drown in opportunity. What we tell folks to really do is have really keen sense of what commitments you can make good on. So if, if you're going for an opportunity, so one of the things we do with folks, right, is build these like bidder profiles. And part of that is, what is that right sized project? What is the minimum project that is worth your guys' time? And what is that maximum project that you can actually make good on? And that's like, let's start there when we're considering a new opportunity. If it's outside of that realm, maybe we don't just go for this because we go for everything in this vertical, right? And getting that part right really matters. And another big part of that is building really strong partnerships, understanding who are those right primes and subs that need to be in your book of business, and close partnerships that you can text when you're in a pinch to say, hey, there's this really cool opportunity. Do you want to do this with me? Without those relationships, all of a sudden what you can make good on becomes a lot more narrow, and the level of risk becomes a lot larger. And some of those strategic moves are just really important to get that part right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a unique differentiator when you're in that marketplace of procurement is really being able to market yourself as, hey, I have a proven structured system process in my delivery. You know, I think that oftentimes gets overlooked, right? It's like, oh, well, I'm able to do this, but how do you do it? It's just as important as that you do it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, it's one of those valuable things that anyone who is about to give you a multi-million-dollar contract, and they want to know you can deliver on that. You know, so being able to express how you do that effectively and efficiently, right, matters to that procurement officer.
Well, you know, we spent a big chunk of today talking about systems for growth. Being able to speak to how and why your team does what it does matters, right? And we've also talked about that as it applies to like SOPs. So we're talking about building documentation that allows you to say, this is how we do what we do. This is how we will make good on our promises. This is how we will onboard you so we can get deep into the technical needs of your specific context. And like these systems all build on each other, right? Not only does this help your team perform, but it also is able to communicate a lot of surety to buyers so they know that they're getting a team who has those systems and processes in place. And that, you know, one of the things we do for folks is we talk a lot about case studies. Build that work into case studies, codify what made that project work so that buyers can see themselves in that and understand that approach in a really deep way. And that does matter, especially when we're thinking about highly technical proposals. You will be scored on that. And so getting those pieces right is really important.
Yeah. Well, it also helps. I was talking to another client who's been in the space of government contracting and in that arena, but now is wanting to transition in the for-profit market, right? And so they're really trying to figure out, how does this translate over? If you look to your system, you know, your process, it probably already expresses itself there, right? Especially even in a technical standpoint, right? If you're providing a service, you know, whatever that thing is, no matter what, if long as the process and the way of your delivery is transcendent to any industry, it demonstrates that way, right?
I think that's absolutely right. I think, you know, one of the things we talk to clients about is stepping out a little bit and treating your business like you would advice you would give a client, right? And sometimes when we're talking about switching contexts, when we're talking about changing strategies, you have to come out of it, really look at what is already true. And sometimes we're overcomplicating it for ourselves. And I think a lot of times the product and the service tells you precisely what it can do. You just have to step out a little bit and sometimes trust the process that you've built to allow you to make that move. And then really understanding what the buyers in other contexts need. What are their unique pain points that differ maybe from your government buyers, and how are you meeting them in a place where they can see that?
And one of the things that Amber is really great at is speaking the language that's really tailored to the proposal that you're submitting, because corporate speak is a lot different than government speak, is a lot different than nonprofit speak. So all these different languages, so called, that folks are expecting to see on those proposals, those minor shifts are actually really important as well, and just really create that really strong proposal as you're kind of venturing into a new arena that you maybe haven't played in before. Having somebody who's been in that and speaks the language and kind of knows this is what they're going to look for. They really care about this. This is great to have, not as crucial. And so I think that's where that shifting is really important, to have somebody to kind of guide you along that, especially in your first few at bats and in those new arenas. I'm mixing up all my sports metaphors. Those are
I love it.
Ladies, this has been such a great conversation. I can't thank you enough. I hope our audience that has joined us appreciated the bonus moments here today. Thank you guys again, Audrain Advising, Amber and Sonja. Thank you to our audience that is here tonight. Next time we will have who is my coach, the person that I go to support me, Melissa Pisano. I'm so excited to have her join us and give some helpful tips from how to be a good coach and for founders. So thank you again for joining us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you guys at Scale Smart Live, our next one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Always such a pleasure
Thanks
speaking
for
with
having
you.
us.
Yeah.
Thank you.